All right, let's dive right into demystifying the Cosmere and mapping out your definitive reading order. If you're a fantasy fan, you've almost certainly heard the whispers about Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. Think of it like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for epic fantasy books. It's this sprawling, wildly ambitious shared universe where different stories take place on totally different planets, complete with their own unique characters, cultures, and honestly, mind-bending magic systems. The payoff for reading these books is legendary, but it sets up a massive problem for new readers, knowing exactly where to start without getting completely lost. Well, that is exactly what we're going to solve in this Explainers today.
13,500. Yep, you heard that right. That is roughly the number of pages currently published in the Cosmere, spread out across 21 books, novellas, and short stories. If you're feeling a wave of utter overwhelm just hearing that number, I completely validate that. It is incredibly daunting to stare down a universe that massive. But hey, I promise you, by the end of this explainer, we're going to break that massive page count down into a perfectly manageable, highly enjoyable, and entirely spoiler-safe roadmap. You won't be intimidated anymore, you're just going to be excited.
So here's our game plan for conquering this universe together. We'll start with a quick welcome to the Cosmere, then talk about choosing your reading path. Next, we'll hit Phase 1, the Foundation, followed by Phase 2, the Heavyweights. After that, we'll break down essential versus skippable books, and finally, lay out your definitive starting roadmap. Let's get to it.
All right, Section 1, welcome to the Cosmere, essentially the MCU of fantasy.
Before you even pick up a book, it's really vital to understand what you're actually reading. The Cosmere isn't one long, continuous, linear story like, say, Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. Instead, it's a vast, shared universe. You've got different series set on entirely different planets, and each planet has its own totally unique magic system. Some use metals, some use light, others literally use color. But they are all subtly linked by overlapping behind-the-scenes characters, shared universal laws, and overarching themes. Looking at the sheer scale of Sanderson's work can absolutely spike your blood pressure, but here is the secret that should instantly put you at ease. Every single core series is expertly designed to work as a standalone. You don't have to read it all at once as one giant narrative. You can just read one series, get a completely satisfying beginning, middle, and end, and step away if you want to.
Moving right along to Section 2, choosing your reading path, where we'll compare the publication order versus the beginner order. We really have to address the great debate in the fandom on how exactly to tackle this beast. You're going to find a dozen different opinions online, and believe it or not, even Brandon Sanderson's own recommended reading order isn't always the best for first-timers. So on one side, you have the historical publication order. While this lets you watch Sanderson grow as a writer, it actively forces you to make these jarring, confusing jumps between different planets and magic systems, which honestly often leads to reader burnout. On the flip side, we have our recommended beginner order. This is a strategic, curated path designed specifically to preserve your emotional momentum, ease you into all the complexity, and crucially, protect those mind-blowing crossover reveals so they hit with maximum impact.
This brings us to a crucial point, summarized perfectly by a quote from our source material. The connections are bonus content, not requirements. I really want you to keep this in mind whenever you start feeling overwhelmed. You do not have to do homework to enjoy these books. You don't need a wiki open while you read, seriously. If you miss a tiny Easter egg where a character from one planet randomly shows up on another, it absolutely will not ruin your understanding of the main plot. Those overarching Cosmere connections, they're just incredibly fun extras.
All right, with those ground rules set, let's begin your actual journey with Section 3, Phase 1, the Foundation, starting on Scadrial. The absolute best starting point for a complete beginner is to drop right down onto the ash-covered dystopian world of Scadrial. We're talking about the 3 books that make up Mistborn Era 1. Step 1, The Final Empire. Step 2, The Well of Ascension. Step 3, The Hero of Ages. This trilogy is widely considered the absolute smoothest entry point to the Cosmere. And why is that? Well, because it's perfectly contained, it's incredibly fast-paced, and it expertly teaches you exactly how Sanderson's intricate magic systems and plotting patterns work long before you have to tackle his massive 1,000-page epics. It just gives you a really complete, satisfying story that sets up future payoffs totally naturally. Now, immediately after finishing that trilogy, we highly recommend reading the novella Mistborn Secret History.
Full disclosure, there's a bit of debate about when to read this one, because some say it mildly spoils a future book, but reading it right after Era 1 is just highly strategic. Era 1 is a pretty intense, gut-wrenching, emotional ride, and Secret History actually helps heal some of those emotional wounds while the events are still super fresh in your mind. Plus, it gives you an amazing head start on understanding the wider universe by introducing the cognitive realm and giving you some real, dedicated time with a fan-favorite recurring character named Hoyd.
Once you've built that solid foundation, we shift into Section 4. Phase 2, the heavyweights, preparing for Roshar.
This is where we prepare to introduce the intimidating big boys of the Cosmere. But actually, before we cross into the absolute thick of it, we need to make one incredibly important strategic pit stop. And that pit stop is Warbreaker. It's a vibrant, incredibly colorful, standalone novel set on a planet called Nulthus. So why stop here? Well, reading Warbreaker right at this exact moment is essentially a strategic masterstroke. It acts as a fantastic, slightly shorter breather after that intense Mistborn trilogy. But more importantly, it sets up these massive, holy wow crossover moments for the heavy epic series that immediately follows. Trust me, you are going to be incredibly glad you read this one first.
And that strategic pit stop builds perfectly into the undisputed centerpiece of the universe, the Stormlight Archive, starting with Book 1, The Way of Kings. This is without a doubt the backbone of the Cosmere. We're talking about those 1,000-plus page giants where all your prior reading really begins to heavily pay off. As you work through this epic series, you'll suddenly start noticing the Easter eggs. You'll recognize a character here, a magical element over there. Eventually, the Cosmere stops being this abstract concept in your head and just becomes completely beautifully real. Now let's address that lingering fear you might still have about committing to 21 books. Here is Section 5. Essential versus skippable books, kind of like the main course versus dessert.
We're going to clearly divide the absolute essentials from the flexible, skippable bonus reads. Think about a minimum complete experience level. If you just want the absolute core main course, it is literally only 9 books. That's Mistborn Era 1, Warbreaker, and the core Stormlight books. That drops your commitment from 13,500 pages down to roughly 8,000. And by doing this, you're still getting 90% of the major Cosmere story beats and those massive revelations, all without having to read the entire catalog. Now, if you want the full core experience, you can bump that up to 17 books. It's totally up to you. You get to choose your commitment level.
So what about the rest? Well, these are what we call your flexible dessert books. We're talking about early standalones like Elantris, the graphic novel White Sand, and Sanderson's famous secret projects like Tress of the Emerald Sea, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and The Sunlit Man. These books are fantastic. They're delicious, but they are dessert. For example, a book like Tress takes place pretty far into the future of the Cosmere. If you read it first, yeah, it's a cute story, but you miss out on some incredibly deep lore. Save these treats until you fully understand how Cosmere magic actually works, just to maximize your fun.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 6, your definitive starting roadmap, the master plan.
We are laying everything out into one easily screenshotable master plan right now, so you aren't left wondering what to do next. You'll know exactly which book to open tonight. Here's your ultimate beginner's journey, step by step. Start here with Phase 1, Mistborn Era 1. Follow that up with Phase 2, Warbreaker. And then, once you are totally primed and ready, dive into Phase 3, the Stormlight Archive. As you embark on this, I really want to remind you of a very famous quote from the Cosmere itself, journey before destination. Take your time, read at your own pace, take breaks to avoid burnout, and just enjoy the incredibly epic ride Sanderson has crafted for us. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to challenge the New World hopper in you. Which world are you going to travel to first tonight? Will you start in the ash falls of Scadrial, the incredibly colorful courts of Nulthus, or the shattered plains of Roshar? Dive in, and I promise you, you'll very soon discover that in the Cosmere, there is truly always another secret.